Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. We're here at a conference with 1,000 pensions professionals who are all looking for the answers. You're a woman that's worked in the biggest tech companies that are the innovators. How can those two things come together, and what societal issues and challenges does this industry need to embrace?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen from working in big tech is you need to just go with the trends of where it is that society is taking you. You know, fighting against sea changes, I just think is never going to work, especially in a connected environment where you have, millions of people that are self-deciding how it is that they want to go about their lives. And that goes into all kinds of ways in this space. One of them, of course, transparency, people demanding more and more, information direct from the source on, people that are making decisions about their lives. That's huge. People want to have so much more authentic and, real conversations with people that are responsible for helping them, in their financial lives or in their personal lives.
So it's for these fairly traditional institutions to embrace that, not be scared of disruption, if you like, and try and use it. What opportunities are there for them?
Yeah, one of my favorite elements of Silicon Valley culture is, the element of actually understanding how people misuse a product or service that you've created in order to understand how they want to use a product or service that you've created. And in a dynamic environment with, so much of, finance actually playing out through technology, it's actually quite easy to make these changes in real time, observe what it is that people are demanding, and make those tweaks to keep up with what it is that is going to keep them happy.
So there are huge opportunities there if you don't resist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think huge opportunities as well to actually engage, with people in a way that you're actually learning from them as well. One of the biggest revelations in the space of, for example, emergency response is realizing that people with a smartphone are actually part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it used to be that, in a disaster zone, your goal was to get all of the people out because, whatever, they were doing in these environments was just not helpful. Now, people actually, with a smartphone that's, connected to the internet, taking pictures of what's going on in their environments, they're part of the solution to actually help to tailor whoever is coming in, whether it's, fire department or the military, to say this is where we need the most resources and the most help. But so many industries haven't yet quite figured out what their role is in that space, especially traditional industries and leaders that are just not quite accustomed to thinking about society in this way.
Now, finance particularly hasn't had the best headlines in the last 10 years for obvious reasons, and there is an opportunity there for these guys to use this new technology to improve that and to have a better relationship with the end user.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that is just more of an ongoing steady drumbeat of conversation. Waiting until you have a perfect solution and then talking to people just doesn't work in the 21st century. Even if you don't know what the solution is, talking about what you do know, talking about what you're doing to find, solutions, talking about how it is that you're going through that decision-making process and involving people at every step along the way really goes down in today's world, in part because there's no limit on the time and space that the internet provides to have those kinds of conversations.
And an industry like this needs to have those conversations because, let's face it, we need to make sure that the generations are saving for the future. This is a pensions conference. We've got to encourage more people to be engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be engaged over the long term. You're starting perhaps at, the conversation at a young age, and you're walking through people's lives with them, and you can really use all of the extraordinary resources around big data to help, understand so much better the kind of customers that you're talking to and what it is that they care about and what drives them in ways that are going to enable so much better of a conversation.
And increasingly those customers are expecting what you described earlier as bespoke services too.
Yes, correct. Yeah, personalization is key across any major industry right now. The expectation that people can tailor the services that they're using to their specific needs. And I think what's exciting about that is it actually brings back a culture that existed in small town society, where you help your neighbors and you look after each other's businesses. We kind of got away from that a little bit, I think, as societies, when the initial wave of technology and scale meant that it was a kind of big one-size-fits-all, which then became a bit more inhuman and harder for people to relate to. Now, thanks to the fact that the network effect is really kicking in, you're actually seeing more bespoke, more personalized services, but at a global scale, which I think is really exciting.
If you ignore tech and you try and bury your head in the sand as well, you're kind of pegging yourself as an institution that is slightly anachronistic and isn't going to appeal, and it's actually the young savers that this industry particularly needs to attract.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you can do that in a way that feels natural to you. I used to work with politicians and finding their voice on social media, and so many of them would sort of say, well, I just don't know how to be funny, on Facebook. And it's like, well, don't be funny on Facebook, be yourself, and connect to people as you. The goal is not to somehow, turn yourself into a joke industry. The goal is to see, okay, how is it that, you can actually harness these new tools, this kind of technology, to reach people, but in a way that's appropriate for the business and for the industry.
You can be accessible without losing professionalism.
Completely.
And you talked as well about finding a voice that is somewhere between your informal family voice, your very professional, authoritative voice. You described it as your dinner party voice. Tell me about that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I see conversations online as very much being an individual in dinner party mode. We tend to think that everything has to be super, super informal on Facebook or on social media. But for leaders, that's never going to work, and that's not really what people expect of senior leadership in whatever industry they are. But equally, the really polished soundbite, or the very carefully shared message that your corporate communications team creates, that doesn't really work either. Approaching today's digital world, today's millions of people that are using these technologies with your dinner party approach is, I think, exactly where you need to be.
So that's being able to enact with the digital natives, if you like, but you've also talked about how companies need to not try and race to compete with tech. They need to use the space that tech's created.
Yeah. Well, I think so many people, because the tech industry itself ticks on really big numbers and really fast speed, there's a tendency for that to infiltrate other industries, where everybody somehow thinks that using these new tools means, moving faster, making decisions faster, running. You actually don't need to change the speed. You need to change your relationship with the space, that the technology is giving you, to have, conversations with people. But really taking ownership over that is important. And, a classic example of that would be, if there's, a major issue that's affecting your industry and you're still figuring out what your response should be to your customers or your consumers, you don't need to figure out, super fast what that response should be. You need to let people know that you're working on it. You need to let them know how you're working on it, how you're thinking about it. So yes, you need to have this ongoing dialogue with people. But I don't think we need to take the thoughtfulness out of our approach to the industries. We just need to use these tools to let people in. Let people inside the boardroom, inside the office door, to have the kinds of discussions that they expect to have in real time, but not necessarily to erode the quality of what we're talking about.
And there's another element of tech for this particular industry, which is actually using it to provide better services, so FinTech. What are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, well, I think it's incredibly exciting, actually, to see the ways in which FinTech is really getting to the heart of the more personalized, bespoke approach to finance that we've been talking about. So much of the entire, sector is built around, saying, okay, in the macro scale, what kind of approach do we need to have, that works for the majority of people? With smaller disruptive entrepreneurs and companies in finance, what they're actually able to do is, use really big numbers to say, yeah, but what works for this individual? Because this individual's context is completely different than somebody else. And you can only do that if you have the access to the kinds of data that 21st century culture provides.
Does it still baffle you that people are scared of tech
Yes.
even now, sort of 20 years into this revolution?
Yes, absolutely. It is, and it's baffling, and it's also sometimes frustrating, because I think that the opportunity of this space far outweighs, the negatives. But if we're not actually brave enough at the senior-most leadership level across all industries to step up to the plate and set examples and be role models for how to harness technology for good, then we can't expect, society to necessarily go in the direction of travel that's helpful. We need leaders at the senior-most level to embrace this space.
You talked about they're using tech for good, and that's something that you're particularly keen to talk more about in terms of what tech can do in terms of anti-corruption and globally.
Yeah, well, I saw a lot of this, and I do see a lot of this, especially in working with civil society leaders around the world. Often the farther you get from the California environment where these tools come from, the more excellence of use of those tools you see for people to actually change the worlds around them for the better. In part because I think people are inspired to figure out solutions. But also something we spoke about earlier, people are less shackled by ruffling feathers and certain norms that are in place that inhibit innovation and creativity and ideas.
So institutionalized society finds it harder to adapt?
Yeah, absolutely, especially in this kind of tech space, because so many of our institutions are just not really set up for it. And so many of them are not set up to empower the very people that need to have a leading voice in this space. So, a context that you see all the time is a, young intern running all of the tech, angles of a business, and, the CEO is never sitting down with them for coffee because they're on opposite ends of the leadership spectrum. We have to actually, programmatically poke holes in those breakdowns in order to, figure all of this out.
You had an audience of 1,000 members of this industry here today. What do you hope they take away from what you had to say?
I hope that they're braver to experiment. I think experimentation is so key to sorting through this space. But experimentation does mean that occasionally things are not going to work. And experimentation also means that you have to admit to your colleagues and to your customers that you're trying something new, and you're not really sure how it's going to land, and join us on this journey and we'll see where it goes.
Be brave.
And I think that anybody who actually takes that approach and is honest about it, I think people respect. And I think we underestimate how much people respect that kind of conversation to say, you know what, good for you for trying.
Elizabeth, a very inspiring note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.